For all of its uncertainties, one thing we know for sure is that Australian football is fond of a new dawn, and this weekend it will bear witness to another. Football in Oceania is entering uncharted territory. For decades, the Pacific has been treated as football's afterthought, disconnected from the professional structures that shape the global game. That changes now. The OFC Pro League isn't just a new competition, it's a statement of intent. 8 clubs, 7 nations, one ambitious attempt to professionalise football across the world's most geographically complex confederation. This Saturday in Auckland, New Zealand, the OFC Pro League, a new era for oceanic football. Hello and welcome to the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachie, Avil, and this is everything you need to know about the OFC's first professional footballing competition. And who else to join me but Matt Olsen. Matt, hello. It is a very exciting time for football in Oceania.
Yeah, well, kia ora, should we say?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Look, this is just awesome. I don't think I've been as excited for the start of a new and this is saying something because we've just had the championship start, right? We've just had the second tier kickoff. But the Pro League, how can you not be just incredibly excited for this? And I think a lot of people have probably, rightly or wrongly, sort of swept it under the rug and just kind of let a lot of the current sort of A-League season and that championship season we had, to start the summer kind of play out before sort of having to consciously think about it. But I think one thing that's really going to speak out to a lot of people is just how much value has been put in the stocks of Australian players, New Zealand players that have previously, plied their trade in the A-League to then have a competition where they can be at home. And then, you have that multi-factor of being able to contribute in these nations that have been, starved for this kind of action for decades. It is a very inherently exciting thing, and I can't wait to get the ball rolling and to explain here on the podcast today everything that's on offer.
All right, let's kick off then, shall we? Why is this all here? Why now? What is the purpose of what we're doing on the OFC Pro League website? It states that the OFC Pro League's primary objective is to create a competition sustainable and fully professional environment in Oceania by lifting the level of training, competition and administration. The league aims to accelerate player development and provide clear pathways for Pacific talent to succeed without needing to leave the region. Now, that is a very obviously football-centric objective in terms of what we hope the competition can be. But obviously, as there always is with football at this scale in the world now, there are more reasons behind the scenes in terms of how we got here in the first place.
Yeah, look, I think it's a pretty knee-jerk reaction from the fact that we've had this big spectacle in the Club World Cup, and if ever there was a time for the OFC to feel really disconnected from the rest of the world, it was dragging out Auckland City into a stage where they were well out of their depth. And if you want my honest opinion, FIFA have seen, especially that opening game against Bayern Munich, I mean, it was the second game of the tournament, for goodness sake, They've seen that, and it's just been like, okay, we have to do something. And so I think it's a big part of it is a knee-jerk reaction there. But also when you've got that very same city with honestly one of the most ambitious football clubs on earth right now, being run by someone who's just a serial winner in Bill Foley. This is a man that took ice hockey into the middle of the desert and made it work. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a pretty special ambition that he holds, and he's clearly seen a lot of what's going on in his home country, and wanted a piece of the pie that just wasn't available because of the logistics of playing in an Asian competition. And I think it's pretty obvious when you put that ambition of what Auckland FC wanted out of it, mixed in with what the powers that be at FIFA had seen, it just made for a pretty special mix. And then there's, rather unfortunately, there's the side of it where you've got influence from bigger countries and they know that they can get votes from these nations at the FIFA Congress. So if we put a bit of money in your coffers, we help give you the infrastructure, we help, professionalize your football. It's going to mean more votes for the Saudi Arabias and the Qatars of the world. And the unfortunate thing is the OFC can't hide that. Saudi Arabia have invested money in the league. It is what it is. But where haven't Saudi Arabia invested money in football? Seriously. So it's not something that we should be afraid of. Let's just call it for what it is. And I think, again, if you speak to the powers that be in Papua New Guinea, in Vanuatu, in the Solomon Islands, they'll tell you, anyone that's coming from Australia, New Zealand, Qatar, Japan, seriously, wherever it be, if these people have money for us, we simply are not in the position to say no. And fair enough. It's a pillar of what being in these countries is all about in more facets than just sport and football. So it is what it is. But basically all it is that they've started out and they've reached out to the existing members of the OFC. If you recall in the initial statement, they tried to get really ambitious. They tried to reach out to Hawaii, which I don't even, like, if there was a collegiate side or someone that wanted to come play, fantastic. I'll be honest in saying that I don't want that side of the international date line. Obviously Tahiti are technically a day behind, I know, but I think having Hawaii away from it when they've got enough of a cultural connection to places like California where pro players can go, and the USL's booming at the moment. So I think it's the right thing to keep this solely Australasian and Pacific focused. But yeah, it was obviously unfortunate in that they've had 7 out of the 11, what you can consider the elite tier members. You basically cut the OFC in half. You've got the four strugglers, the 2 Samoas, the Cook Islands, Tonga, and then you've got the 8 who can actually professionalize and become better. Obviously, the omission here is New Caledonia. Incredibly tragic what's going on with the Kanak community, ties with France, the war and the riots that have broken out. Very, very sad situation. They've had to pull out of the OFC Nations Cup in 2024 because of it. And look, the logistics of it just couldn't happen. Fair enough. They are still going to play off for a World Cup in Monterey, and full power to them against Jamaica. So, unfortunate that New Caledonia couldn't be a part of it, but it makes sense. So now I guess we've touched on really why it's happening. And again, who's mostly involved with that. But Lachie, did you have any sort of input on the spectacle at all?
No, I think you got it to a good point. I think the best course of action is to move into the structure of the tournament. So this is, of course, a league that is subsidized paid for by the clubs, subsidized through the OFC, through FIFA, and as you've pointed out, through large investment from places like Saudi Arabia as well. And obviously it has that objective to essentially just establish professional football in Oceania. So like you were talking about the Club World Cup, obviously plans for this tournament had, started to be created before that tournament. But obviously when you're thinking of the Club World Cup and you're looking at, okay, these teams are managing here, you can see what was coming, right? The Bayern result was never a surprise. So, and then of course, a couple of days later, they go and get a 1-1 draw with Boca Juniors, which was remarkable in itself. Hopefully they can do that from a somewhat point of regularity, depending on who qualifies through. But obviously that's where we come from. So the structure of the tournament itself, 8 clubs across 7 nations. I think there was 24 applicants across the region that applied. They worked through their criteria. Some more serious than others. Some were a bit more ambitious than others. Some people obviously very upset not to be involved. This is maybe a good point for a tangent as well, because Wellington Phoenix, Matt, who were the only professional club in Oceania for a very long period of time, have been denied this opportunity to essentially champion the region that they were doing by themselves for close to 20 years.
Look, it's actually as simple as this, right? When you've got Auckland FC, who are one of the big backers and one of the people really pushing the tournament's existence, mixed in with the foundation of a South Island team and Christchurch is. We'll touch on this later in the recording here, but Christchurch is going to want to put itself on the football map, and the entire South Island needs representation. It's been sorely missed. The infrastructure is finally now coming back in the recovery of the 2011 earthquake, and it's just fundamentally the right thing to do. And I think again when you look at that, you look at again, and they're only playing a second 11. So again, we'll touch on the on-field stuff in a second. But you've got that ambition from Auckland. You've got the necessity for a South Island team. You could not justify a third New Zealand team in the competition when the bulk of what we're here to do is actually for the benefit of the other members to professionalise their setups and their players and their infrastructure. When New Zealand already has that, it's really hard to make the argument that they should be having an even bigger chunk of the pie in something that's not for their own benefit, or at least in theory had not been planned for their own benefit. So I think the Phoenix just were, very unlucky in that sense. But again, with the way it's played out, I think there's hope to really build a stronger connection. When you think about geographically where Wellington is, the whole point of its existence is it's at the south of the North Island, to be a bridge between both, right? It's diplomacy and politics 101, right? And I think there's no reason why the South Island, if it builds up strong enough, can't be a bit of a catchment for Wellington. And then if it does become big enough to have its own team, and we look at a Christchurch license in the A-League, so be it. But I still feel that the Phoenix can contribute in some way. And when you look, again, personnel-wise, there's a lot of Phoenix influence in some of these squads, and that's something we should still be really proud of. But again, I've very famously disrespected the Wellington Phoenix community on a podcast before, and I'm not about to do it again. So let me just say I actually really appreciate that there is that strong influence from them on multiple teams in this competition.
You have to tell me that story after we stop recording a little bit later on. Look, I think you're right. As soon as the decision is made that you want a North Island and a South Island, it makes it really difficult for Wellington, because Auckland, as much as the history doesn't exist, looking forwards, I think it's a clear choice in terms of resources and ambition and stuff like that. So Wellington miss out. Unfortunately, Auckland are in. They're one of the two New Zealand sides. You get one from Australia as well, which was controversial at points, but South Melbourne will be that entry from Australia. They're playing in a circuit system, so a double round robin between all 8 teams. So you play each team twice, but it's not home and away. It's across 5 separate locations. We're kicking off in New Zealand this weekend, and then we come back there for the eventual finals as well. So you play all teams twice, and we split into a leaders group and a challengers group. So the top 4 and the bottom 4 then play against each other in essentially a single round robin. And then there's a little playoff match before the semifinals and finals, just to give some carrot on the stick for the winner of that challengers group to play the 4th place in the leaders group. And then the winner of that joins the top 3 from the leaders group to straight semifinals and finals. So the competition obviously kicks off this weekend. It concludes on the 24th of May. So we're kind of just waiting to get to the point where the amount of matches kind of ends us at the end of this typical European calendar, which of course a lot more countries around the world are observing now as well. Each team, in terms of squad composition, are allowed 3 foreign players and an additional 3 if they are from an OFC nation, which we've seen a few clubs take advantage of, which is exciting. The winner will obviously win the competition, but qualify for FIFA's Intercontinental Cup. And then the best performing team, by what metrics, I'm not exactly sure, Matt, but the best performing team over 3 years will also qualify for the Club World Cup.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the one thing to note there is it's made obsolete the OFC Champions League in some ways. And I think if you are in Auckland City, a team that was the heart and soul of it for so long, you got to be frustrated. But I think, again, and it might be a controversial thing to say, but they're the ones that have been stubbornly keeping their amateur status for certain financial reasons. And so, again, they really complain ultimately. I think it's very clear that this is the right direction to go. And I think it's also very clear that there's just something so unique about the fabric of being here. We talk about it with starting a second tier here in Australia, with the logistics of having to muck around with the format, not really knowing where it's going. A similar thing to what the Pro League is going to face. That's all to do with the logistics and, mostly the geography of the country as well. But when you look at airfares, when you look at a map, I mean, things are just so logistically inherently difficult. There's a reason youth teams have not been able to show up to OFC competitions before. It's just sometimes it's not. You have to wait for a boat, for a plane on a certain day of the week. And I mean, fair credit to Egypt when it happened, in the 1930s when they missed a ship and couldn't go to the World Cup. Fancy it happening in this day and age to, the PNG under-17s. It just does. That's what we're talking about here in the islands, right? So, look, I think you have to give credit, but also something I wanted to kind of touch on earlier with the format, and I do just want to say this with regards to FIFA's insight in all of this. FIFA have obviously theorized in the wake of the European Super League and all the controversy with that. FIFA have long theorized, can they make a bit of money out of creating these Super League formats in other continents? Now, in I think 23 or 24, They tried to make an African Super League with Wydad Casablanca, Mamelodi Sundowns, all of these teams. It flopped after one season. But my whole progression on kind of why this league system and why the implementation of it was important was because when you think about that Super League format, you may be thinking about let's bring all the resources together and make money in some ways. And, fair credit, big clubs in Europe, FIFA, whoever wants to benefit from that, they're going to have, nefarious and malicious means, and it's not going to be very fun. But this is the only continent where it actually makes sense and where it can actually work. And so I think what's naturally happened here is there's the progression of these failed ideas elsewhere, and these terrible ideas that people hate elsewhere, now being applied to the one place where it makes sense. And so I just wanted to comment on that, because I think it's actually really important to understand that there has been a lot of logistics and a lot of really hard thinking from people in the right spaces to make something like this work. So I just wanted to comment on that, because again, I think that the Super League thing is clearly just a total flop, right? But here, by making it happen, I think we are going to strengthen the whole region. And so I just wanted to touch on that before we touch on anything more serious. But again, with the circuit system, you're seeing how on that theme of it being a Super League, bringing all the resources together, and then implementing something like this where you can logistically make it work, that is the kind of thing that can actually set a fabric for it to become a bit more of a permanent fixture and really help it run as a league system going forward. So I think it's really the right way to cement a long-term future and a long-term vision for something like this. Whereas with the championship, we have the goal here in Australia of let's try and make this promotion and relegation. Let's try and make this a full-time league. The OFC Pro League doesn't necessarily need to do that. It doesn't need to be week in, week out, because who the hell is flying from Papiti to Auckland week in, week out? No one is actually doing that. It's not feasible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, you're spot on. It's funny how you come from a position like, the European Super League, and, it filters all the way down. It's like, you know what? Oceania League. Yes, that makes sense. And just in an entirely different context, the same idea is just met with such gratification and acceptance and appreciation compared to other parts of the world. But that is where Oceania are at. And again, this is all about professionalizing football in this region and allowing that baseline of, players don't have to have other jobs. They can turn up to training every single day and just be football. And another advantage, and I've, in the last couple of years since we've been doing this podcast, occasionally when a niche AFC question comes up, you do a dig into the competition regulations and you try and find this clause and that clause and what's going on. And I was reading some of the OFC Pro League stuff as well. And I think one thing that people really underestimate about FIFA and why they're such an impressive organization in this respect, big asterisk there, is that you see these press releases that are like, oh, FIFA have just concluded the 47th, global administrators, executives training course or something like that. And then you flick over to the next one. But the boring stuff like that, training people in this region to administer football competitions, showing them minimum standards for regulations, for things as simple as what items do you need to fill out on a team sheet for a match, right? Things like that. What does a basic contract look like for these players? What are minimum standards for player accommodation? What do you need at the ground? Do you need ice for cooling, for medical? All those kinds of things. Being able to educate them and then put them into practice in a professional environment like this just raises the floor of what you're capable of so significantly. It really provides the platform for what can hopefully come. And again, I know we're not talking about evolving the competition in certain respects, but in terms of producing talent out of Oceania, in terms of national teams having a greater standing on the world stage, those are the little things at this level that are going to be so important to those goals.
100%. I'd like to, that was actually so well said. That is actually just fire podcast content right there.
Thank you.
but it's so inherently true. When we talk about what's missing in the region, it's simply that professionalism, right? Gonna go a little bit out of whack here, but I promise I'll get it back on track. The story of Next Goal Wins, the famous story of the 2014 American Samoa team. And Thomas Rongan comes in after the death of his daughter-in-law. He just needs this fresh start in his life, and he ends up on the other side of planet Earth. And he arrives and he sees the fast food diet and the non-serious training regime. And he just goes, guys, we're just going to do the most basic stuff that like an under-12s team would do in Germany. But slowly, step by step, we're going to make it work. And he turned American Samoa into a winning team. And like it's that simple. All you have to do is take the simple things step by step, understand that these are the fundamental basics in being able to take something like football and make it something that can be a real asset in these people's lives. And you're 100% right. It's the boring things, it's the mundane things that aren't so fun that actually make the biggest difference. And I mean, look, we're not exactly talking. Let's just be clear. Like, we're not talking about taking players off the street, taking kids who are playing street ball and putting them into a professional league. These are players that have already been around at elite levels for a really long time. And one player in particular that I really love to highlight, and I might as well use that as my segue to move on field if you don't mind, because when I look at the squads and really a lot of what this competition's been about, firstly, the foreign recruitment has actually been really shrewd, both in coaching development, the players that have just been able to be signed, the thought process around where players can come from, the traditional weaknesses that OFC teams have, and if we're going to be bringing in a foreign player, where are the positions that we can fit in those foreign players? But there's also just the idea of when you look at professionalism in the OFC, inherently because of the backgrounds that these players and individual athletes come from, they are always notoriously late bloomers, right? The Roy Krishners and the Brian Kaltaks of the world, which ultimately we're here to duplicate them by the hundreds in professionalizing the league. They're inherently late bloomers, but they're guys that have always had that athletic talent. And I really need to talk about Tainui Tahu because oh my God, if there is a man on earth that's deserved this opportunity any more than Tainui Tahu, like I believe he's about 33 or 34. He could honestly be closer to the age of about 37 or 38. I'm disappointed I couldn't recall that off the top of my head. This is a man that has captained his team to a home beach soccer World Cup final, has played time and time again in that competition, has been playing in the leagues in Tahiti and in amateur tiers in France his entire life, had the honour and the privilege of playing against Fernando Torres in Spain at the 2013 FIFA Confederations Cup. Literally anything that's relevant that's happened in Tunisian sport, this man has been a part of. And he gets to, again, whatever age he is, and I do apologise that I've not got the number there in front of me, he gets to call himself a professional footballer. And I'm sorry, but just like, what a story. What a story. The entire premise of the league was to take the Tainui Tahus of the world and say, you are finally heard and your talent is finally recognised. And it just warms my heart. Because, again, literally, he's the heartbeat of the entire country, you know what I mean? All of the islands across French Polynesia sing the praises of this guy, and it's just so awesome. But to talk a little bit more on the recruitment and what it's been like, you know, you've got PNG Hikari, who have obviously had a lot of influence from Australia more historically, and especially a lot of ties with Queensland. Papua New Guinea Rugby League and cricket, which have also been increasing in professionalism over time, have relied on a lot of talent out of Queensland, and that's the exact same with their soccer. I think that they've had that influence. Sadly, it's the other Melanesian countries, your Vanuatu's and your Solomon Islands, have really taken that spotlight in recent years. Papua New Guinea's really, really fallen by the wayside in a football sense, but they've also been able to be quite shrewd in that whenever you think of where you can get good foreign recruitment from, you always think Brazil. And I can see Kaui Silva has been recruited into the team. This is a guy that's been playing in the lower tiers of Brazil. And you know what? They might be lower tiers, but in a place like Papua New Guinea, you can just imagine everyone in that setup just listening to him, you know, really being encouraged by his presence and his values. And I really, really hope it's the kind of signing that works out on paper, because it's just one where if he gets kicking and the whole team is there to vibe with him, it's one that's really, really exciting me. But again, when I refer to what I said before about the weaknesses, traditionally with your OFC teams, you're going to get weak goalkeeping. And when I look at the goalkeeping stocks, and you can see with the way I've written this down on the run sheet, Lachie, the goalkeepers that have been called up in this competition have some of the most bizarre resumes going around, and it's enough to make any football fan just foam at the mouth. I mean, I actually can't believe what I'm reading when I was looking into this. So you've got, firstly, a big shout to Didier Dupree, who has been called up for Fiji, Bulla FC in Fiji. What a bizarre combination. This is a guy that's played across the Ligue 1 and Ligue 2. He most recently was playing in Luxembourg with Dudelange. And he was playing in the Europa League and the Conference League for Dudelange. Number one goalkeeper at the biggest club in Luxembourg. And Bulla FC have gone, do you want to come and play in Fiji? And he said yes to the call up. Fiji's number one goalkeeper is going to be a French guy who's been, again, the number one for Luxembourg's biggest club. What a story. Again, just what a story. And it gets better and better because South Island United, and again, they're a club where, they've got Oscar Van Hatten out of the Phoenix. They've been able to bring in some really good talent. Ryan Fuchs, who was bowling out in the championship for South Melbourne, is at South Island United. They didn't necessarily need to go this route, but they've called up a Dutch goalkeeper, Steven van Dijk. Now, that's a pretty good get. Like, he's got Eredivisie experience. It's freaking awesome for this level. But the thing with Steven van Dijk that I just find so unbelievably incredible is he played in the Faroe Islands League. The guy has played in the Arctic Circle and is going to play in the South Pacific. How unbelievably incredible is that? Like, it's so cool. It's just incredible. He's literally played as far north as you can get and as far south as you can get. I mean, what a story. What a story. And the other one I picked out was there's a Canadian goalkeeper that Tahiti recruited. Now, again, the Canadian league that's been set up, and again, I speak about the USL all the time, these leagues are just increasing, their professional standards so much to the point where they are genuine second tiers in North America right now. Can you imagine getting and again, I'm sorry, I don't know enough about his resume, but if you're playing for Ottawa FC or, the Cavalry in Alberta, and all of a sudden you get a call up saying, do you want to come and play in French Polynesia? You're not exactly going to say no. I mean, what an incredible story. So those goalkeeping stocks are just, look out for all of these guys. Look out for all of the Glovemen because they just have such incredible stories to tell and really a big driver.
And I think,
for the league.
I think people will be surprised to hear that Matt Acton is also one of those foreign goalkeepers that is playing for Vanuatu United as well.
Yeah. Well, again... sorry to interrupt, but Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands, I mean, again, we've not really touched on it, but their increasing presence in the lower leagues in Australia, and Josh Smith, who has been the heart and soul of Solomon Islands football and futsal for a long time, all he's done is go to these NPL clubs in South Australia, in Queensland, and say, we're going to give you a chance to play our talent and throw them in the deep end. And can you imagine now going from a place where your ceiling was the NPL 1 in South Australia or something like that, like we've seen from a Rafael Leai. All of a sudden he's playing in Bosnia. These are the kind of fleeting opportunities that someone like that was going to have to get to be able to become a professional. Now you've got it on your doorstep, and you're playing alongside guys like Jez Lofthouse, who have that A-League experience through the Brisbane Roar. I just think that it's really good to fuse that talent together. Someone like Matt Acton, perfect example, has played big A-League finals before, legend of Australian football here, really. For him to then go and give that experience to a country like Vanuatu, who have been on the verge of some very, very special things in recent years. Just it's such an important thing to understand what small value we as Australians have in the region as well, and that's inherently very special.
And the pinnacle of that argument of giving back to this new generation that's been provided this opportunity that hasn't come before is Roy Krishna for Bulla FC in Fiji. Just I can't even. I'm so looking forward to it this weekend. Walking out, he's going to walk out with the captain's armband on to play his first professional game of football in the Oceanic region for a club named for his country. Obviously, he's played national team games, but to see the reward of a career like his, coming from the Pacific Islands, making it in Australia, getting an overseas move again, into India and had a good career there as well, to come back and see, it's extreme to say this doesn't happen without him, but he has contributed to the progress of this competition 100%. And to see that reward and to see him come back and play is going to be so cool.
Yeah.
And just linking those two generations together.
On an emotional and a sentimental level, it's exactly what I explained with Tahu, but it's actually even more important and of significance because he's actually been the one to go and make it as a pro. And we'll never forget, this is a guy that's a Johnny Warren medalist. This is a guy that grew up in a village having to kick around plastic bags and use sticks as the goalposts. How do you even begin to describe walking out for Footballer FC with the armband? Exactly like you say. It's enough to make any football fan look at it on paper and just get incredibly emotional because of just the background that these kids have to come from, and now as the men that they are, to be able to be those leaders and those pioneers. Yeah, it's a very inherently very, very special thing. I obviously now can get to the point on the run sheet where I've basically just put a little marker and a little goal for all 8 clubs, and I think it's nice if I don't know if you want to have a bit of back and forward with it. Obviously, some teams you might be able to add more context for than others, and some things I've just wrote things there that internally I'll know a little bit about. But
I'll interrupt if I have something to say.
Why don't you? Because I think it's important. I've started with South Melbourne because I think it's nice and easy. And again, you are the Victorian in the room. So what can you say about what you think South Melbourne will bring to the OFC? And more importantly, I think Australia's growing footprint in re-engaging with the region as a whole.
Yeah, so individually for South Melbourne, this competition is just so fueled by pride and identity. They have their own thing going in Australia at the moment. They've just won the inaugural championship, of course, and trying to break that glass ceiling in terms of breaking through to the top level of Australian football, hopefully one day, and then even beyond. I'm sure they have those aspirations. That's one part of it. But it feels separate. The OFC Pro League is an opportunity that was provided to them, and they thought, well, if it's going to be someone in Australia, it should absolutely be us. But I don't think it really contributes to those bigger goals of growing and building and being bigger in Australia and whatever. So this is all about pride. They were the Oceanic team of the century last century. They've won Oceanic competitions. They've participated as Oceania's representative at the first ever Club World Cup as well under the old system. And there is just so much pride in South Melbourne's identity being connected to Oceania that this is just like another coming of that era. So a lot of what they're going to do is really it's an emotionally driven competition for them. And one difficulty they're going to have, at least from a footballing sense, is that they will be playing 2 competitions, and we'll talk about Auckland a little later, but they will be the one club in here with a relatively similar squad playing in 2 leagues at the same time. So their squad registration, to my understanding, is the same squad representation for the NPL in Victoria. So I don't think there's any changes. They might be able to have extended lists in certain situations, but a lot of those players are going to be the same, when probably the first half of the year will be OFC Pro League, and then the back half of the year they'll play that squad in NPL and maybe some under-23s in the NPL earlier on. So they have an interesting football decision to make in combination with what is a very emotive campaign in the OFC Pro League.
But again, I think there are still a lot of ways in which it will help the professionalism of the organisation as a whole, because it's extra games to add on top of cup commitments, championship commitments, NPL commitments, and also just that experience of foreign travel. Which again, if you're a club in South Melbourne shoes, literally you just wouldn't get at all, right? Which NPL club is doing regular foreign travel? So for me, I think there's elements
Preston
to it.
Lions is like the only one.
Yeah,
they did a little trip mid-season.
Yeah, but this is it. Like it's such an inherently rare thing to experience, and so for it to be a regular fixture within your footballing operation, that for me just says that it is still, yes. Don't get me wrong. It's all about the sentiment of their place within the OFC, but it also really speaks to another challenge that they can add on top, like another layer of the cake, essentially, to really complete what, like, the calendar year of 2026 will be so incredibly hectic. I would actually really love to hear from executives about how the finances of it work out. They will, especially if they go on big cup runs, if the championship goes well for them and they're in another grand final, they are easily going to amass nearly 60 games. Like, it's just such uncharted territory for any organisation in this part of planet Earth to play that much football. So
and one more point on them as well is that, unlike the other OFC teams, obviously South Melbourne are technically an AFC team, one condition of their entry in this tournament is that they have to pay their own way. So to be that committed to this competition, They're not allowed to qualify for the Club World Cup or the Intercontinental Cup through this competition either. So it really is, they're putting a lot on the line here to reconnect to that past. With obviously, as you say, some of the professional learnings that will come along with it.
100%. So I think the other one that you're qualified to talk on would be Auckland FC. So obviously the second 11 approach is really something that had to be maintained for the simple fact that the actual Auckland FC club is still mostly AFC registered, being an A-League club. Like you couldn't split it both ways confederationally, and you couldn't really split it both ways with regards to being the only professional club on earth playing in two leagues. Like it actually just is not feasible. Registration and those logistics aside. So when you look at the strategy that they've gone with, and clearly again with some of these key signings, a lot of it is let's get essentially that NPL quality in, that New Zealand, since the reform of the National League, it's become such an impressive competition. Let's just take the best of that level and see if it's good enough to go out there and compete at the Pro League. And really, when you look at it on paper, why shouldn't it be, right? So again, from the executives, the people that want this team to be there at Club World Cup, in Morocco in 2029, that's quite simply the right strategy going forward, isn't it?
It is. I was wondering, I'm assuming you've seen the full list of all the players for Auckland, because in the regulations, there is a little loop that allows for 3 players that are registered for the A-League team to be selected in this competition. Well, have they actually used that?
I want to say no. I know that there's been a lot of sketchy things going on. Whether they've used it or not, I don't know. But more or less, I wouldn't be able to tell you who the players are. I think there's been some worrying things going on with player registration, because I think it was Tahiti United. Someone got in trouble for registering players later beyond the deadline. But honestly, again, just going back to the logistics of it all, I think that was something that we could kind of foresee happening. What effect that has on Auckland, I don't know. But I just come back to that same statement of they've obviously still been very shrewd in the way that they've recruited and the way that they've foreseen the future of the competition eventually going in their favour. It would be impossible to see them as a team that isn't there come grand final day of the competition.
Yeah, no, they will absolutely be strong just by their resources and their capabilities. And I think having Bill Foley there as the owner, with his ambition, just seemingly just to his thirst for success wherever he goes, and just the opportunistic nature of this competition popping up, I find it hard to imagine that the OFC Pro League is popping up, let's go get an A-League team in New Zealand was his thought process. That would seem odd to me. So the club has probably come first, and then this opportunity has been afforded to him. And I imagine his mind was like, oh, okay, another thing we can go win. And this Auckland can qualify for those international competitions through the Pro League. I'd be absolutely fascinated to know how they're allowed to register players for those competitions if they do end up qualifying. But yeah, their resources will be second to none in this competition. So you'd have to expect that they'd be up there. I also
think from like a global perspective, from a FIFA perspective, like they're just going to have an inherent interest in looking after Auckland. Do you know what I mean? Because if they can rock up in Morocco and actually go on to beat the likes of Boca Juniors, it's a whole other conversation. It'll be in FIFA's interest. It'll be in New Zealand's interest. It'll be in the OFC's interest. Heck, it will be in Australia's interest too, are we kidding? It'll make our league look good. So, yeah, 100%. And I think whilst making sure them and South Melbourne don't run away with the competition, which is a whole other question, that there'll be a lot of that ambition going in the right place. And I think, again, not to say that this team is out of it, but when it comes to South Island United, I think it's clear. Let's get ourselves on the map. And again, I talk about a lot of that Phoenix influence. I mentioned the likes of Oscar Van Hattem as well, who I imagine will be that starting striker. Someone like Ryan Fuchs, who brings a lot of that NPL and now Australian Championship experience to that Kiwi fold to really, I think, blend the National League, which makes up the bulk of this squad, to then bring in that Australian experience and kind of blend the difference. Like I was saying before with the Brazilian recruitment to Papua New Guinea, I think a lot of those National League players will then want to buy into the project of, hey, what are the Australians going to offer us? Or rather, Futes is a Kiwi, the Australian influenced players to be able to make sure that we can actually hold it with these Auckland FC. Because if I look at someone like Tasmel Dakudis, for example, who's just come from a Perth Glory, then to Marconi, now into this Auckland FC setup. And we didn't even mention the Auckland City impact of someone like Emiliano Tarde, for example, as part of Auckland FC setup. But that's another question. With South Island, I think it's just simple. Let's just bridge that gap, make the National League grow, make Christchurch football grow, make sure the South Island can build those steps, and then once we're unleashed, who knows, maybe we might be able to go to some of these countries, especially the ones on neutral territory, give South and Auckland a really, really troublesome time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, to be fair, probably where my expertise taps out. So just give us the list of all the clubs and some of their focuses for this competition.
Right. No worries. Quite simply for PNG and Hikari, I think PNG, again, are really in a tricky spot where simply from a sporting infrastructure perspective, simply from a political perspective, since gaining, and trust me, it is relevant to football, since gaining that NRL license and everything that's happened with the Security Pact, Papua New Guinea have really just said no to football as a code. And quite simply, I think Hikari is the one club where I look at, and I'm trying to find that ambition, and I'm trying to be excited. The national team's really fallen off. I mean, in 2016, they made the OFC Nations Cup final. They've consistently just been completely battered in group stages and not come anywhere close. They've tried to bring in a coach from Denmark. They tried to get Warren Moon involved. They tried to incorporate themselves with teams in the NPL Queensland, and it simply just hasn't worked. So for Hikari, you simply go into the league with a bit of foreign experience, with a bit of that ambition, just simply restore pride in Papua New Guinea football, because it's been a bit of a joke. Like, they've really, really fallen off. And it doesn't really get much more simple than that. And I think, again, when it comes to the rest of the competition, I can speak in very glowing terms. I simply can't do that for Hikari. Solomon Kings are one where I just look at it and I think the strategy there with someone like Josh Smith, who has been trying his hardest to incorporate these Solomon Islands players, get them into the NPL, understanding that they have had one of the strongest futsal teams globally as well. Like, they've consistently made World Cups. Unfortunately, New Zealand qualified for the most recent World Cup in Uzbekistan. Kind of took that away from the futsal program. But that's just one where, again, when we look at futsal as a stepping stone to then go from the safety and the comfort of gymnasiums in a country like the Solomon Islands to then, with a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the money, a lot of the foreign aid and things that are then going into sporting products through something like the Pacific Oz program, which I don't know if you know much about it, Lachie, but obviously it's a government program where through aid, we are then using sport as a way to really gain a foothold and gain stronger relations with these countries. And
a lot of the junior teams are doing tours there through this program.
Yes, the Joeys are going off there as well and playing those teams. So a lot that Australia, and again, a figurehead like Josh Smith, has done to just increase the foothold that Solomon Islands and the relevance that Solomon Islands football can have throughout countries where we have things a little bit better here in Australia. And I just think it's just the kind of ties and the kind of thing that really for me says, on their day, this team can be top 4 potential. I just think that Solomon Islands football is going in the right direction, and through the Solomon Kings, through, again, the recruitment of someone like Lofthouse, these Brisbane Raw tours, these Joey's tours, these Olyroos tours, it's just going in the right direction, and I'd be very, very hopeful for someone like the Solomon Islands. So now the question for them becomes, we've had the Krishna, we've had the Caltac, why can't the next big thing be a Solomon Islands player? Obviously, Rafael Leao is a global phenom. People know his story, and to be honest, I don't really know why he's so famous. I think he was really big on Football Manager saves or something to that effect. But
he was probably a wonder kid.
Yeah. People globally know who he is, but he's obviously not hit the heights anywhere close to what the other two did. So I think, the question becomes, with everything that's going right for them, produce that player. Quick move over to the others. Sorry?
One more thing, actually, that I can mention on Solomon Kings. Obviously, somewhat of an Australian connection with Ben Kahn being the head coach. Came through at NPL level, did very well in Victoria, and then got his gig that lasted only a few months at the Brisbane Raw. So another example of that other kind of opportunity for someone like a Ben Kahn.
Exactly. And again, you've got someone like Josh Smith, an Australian pulling the strings, has had his finger in every pie involved in Solomon Islands football. So, No, exactly right. They're on the right steps. With Vanuatu, I think the objective is clear. The national team have hit a lot of heights recently. OFC Nations Cup final in 24, making the last stage of World Cup qualification. Just very clear that they've been going in the right step. A lot of that has been bolstered by, the likes of Kaltak being involved, his professionalism, his leader as a captain. Sadly, very, very sadly for me, the hero of the 2024 semi-final, Jonathan Spokey Jack, is not here in the squad. And when I did see that, that was quite an emotional experience for me because a one-moment wonder, but a player that I will be thinking about when I'm on my deathbed. Like, seriously, just what a hero. And I think the thing with Vanuatu is they've taken an approach that no other club has. They've recruited a player from the German leagues. And I just think that that's something that's so cool because what they've done is they've been able to bring in Thomas Rongen style with American Samoa in 2014, just bring in a coach who has foreign experience from a completely foreign environment, make him the national team coach, make him the Vanuatu United coach, like we've seen with like the U23 programs throughout Asia kind of thing, where you've got those fingers, running through all the players, the whole setup, and it just that unity is going to be the springboard that they need. Squad-wise, again, it is pretty simple. You've taken the league, you've made a super team of what the Vanuatu League was, and you're going to roll the ball on from there. So I think the talent ID is a really big thing that they want to keep going. Make sure that they're a country, again, in the similar world to Solomon Islands. Make sure that if there's going to be a big name that comes up and makes it big in the A-League or wherever else in the world they could be going now, who knows? We could get OFC players in the CSL or the J-League or the K-League. How awesome would that be? Vanuatu needs to be that country. And lastly, we've got two more left. Buller, I'll just move on again. You've mentioned the sentimentality of the Roy Krishna story. The likes of Tommy Dunn, who's someone that I think is just such a bowler at that level. He's going to be like a duck to water at that level. But the biggest thing with Buller is when you look infrastructurally at Fiji, and we've seen it, again, I know you're hardly a rugby union man in your corner of the globe, but you've seen it with the introduction of Fiji and Drua. Simply put, Fiji has over 1 million people in it. It's actually a fairly wealthy country, all things considered. Fiji, in sporting terms, should be the country that actually is just up there with Australia and New Zealand in oceanic sport, and it's just never really hit those heights outside of its first love, rugby union. So where they've been able to make World Cup quarterfinals in rugby union, football really needs to be that catalyst that they can spring it forward and make it relevant. When it comes to OFC Nation Cup finals, we should be thinking New Zealand. We should be thinking Fiji as well. And again, to the Tommy Dunns, to the Roy Krishnas of the world, you've got an entire squad with you there. You've got Didier Dupree coming from Luxembourg. You've just got something there that is a winning culture. So again, where the goal is quite clear for someone like Solomons to go and establish yourselves as number 4 behind South Auckland and the South Island, Fiji could not even just establish themselves as number 4. They could even pick one of those big 3 to be number 3. That is where their ceiling is at. And as far as again, the sporting infrastructure, the passion and the feeling in a country like Fiji, they just simply need to hit those heights. They need to set the bar that high because, again, we've seen it with the Drua becoming a team that can make quarterfinals, semi-finals domestically. We've seen the national team go and make a Rugby World Cup quarterfinal. Football is capable of doing that. So let's go and set that bar. Let's go and reach it. And again, have the prodigy in Roy Krishna lead the way. Such an awesome story. And lastly, and I think honestly very fittingly, ending it with Tahiti. I think unfortunately for Tahiti, the recruitment has been very emotional. I think it has been based on let's get a lot of these aged players together and let's really try and bring those glory days together to send these guys off on a high. Now, if you know anything about what's been going on in global football, Costa Rica have just embarrassed themselves, not qualified for the North American World Cup, trying to rely on nostalgia. Iran have driven themselves through hell trying to rely on the nostalgia. Tahiti, this is, again, bit of an unfortunate situation. I don't think this is the way to be starting the OFC Pro League era. But again, a lot of foreign influence from France, a lot of the recruitment there that's going to adapt to this level fairly well because of what they've experienced. And again, another real tragedy that New Caledonia isn't here, because when you take these guys that have played a little bit of Ligue 1 or Ligue 2 and you're putting them into that professional situation you can get in Australia and New Zealand, I don't think it's a standard that they're going to be too far off. And again, a perfect example is that grand final of the OFC qualification. New Caledonia really held New Zealand for a good 50, 60 minutes of that game. No reason why these vets in Tahiti can't do the same. It's more just, this is supposed to be about blooding talent, and I think ultimately with the recruitment, maybe they've not done that. But again, the sentiment of seeing a Tahu, someone with that famous name, going out, holding his own, that'll be a very, very special thing. And I think, again, Tahiti are a country that we can just trust to be that good. They're not going to be a million miles off. They won't be the worst team in the league, so just full power to them, and let's see how they go.
All right, let's wrap this up all nicely together. In terms of the overall goals for the competition, we referenced the Australian Championship a couple of times because it does feel very similar. This is a start of a new thing. It has grander objectives, and success in the Australian Championship was just the fact that we got there after so many delays, and we've started and it's moved forward and season 1 is done, and now we can assess the results of what's happened and formulate a strategy from there. Is that the same kind of goal in the Pro League? If everyone gets to the games, if they're all completed, if there's no big administrative or operational muck-ups and the tournament just proceeds as it should, is that the new era off the ground? That's a tick mark?
Yeah, look, I'm caught, I think we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking about it more and more. I think initially, in the similar mold to the Championship, you do just have to let it play out, right? Let's just actually see it and see what to expect from it. Then you start with the ambition. But because of FIFA support, because of the foreign investment, because of all these things, you're dangling that carrot of the Club World Cup in Morocco in 2029, and you're saying there's already a 3-year, 4-year goal to build towards. And there's no reason why, especially from an Auckland FC perspective, especially from a South Island perspective, dare I even say Fiji Solomons, the carrot has been dangled. There you go, get my words out. And they'll be setting a long-term vision. They should do that. They should set a long-term vision, but also it would be naive to set a really ambitious bar and not have any idea of how to go to it. So yeah, I think it's twofold. Let the competition play out, but really build towards where the clubs and the competition can go. And ultimately, again, I think just the emotion and the sentiment of it, even, for us here in Australia, for goodness sake, I can't even really consider myself someone that lives in the Pacific because I live on the coast of the Indian Ocean. But, obviously still one big happy region and one big happy family. And how unbelievably cool is this competition, just 7 days or 5 days away from when we're recording this, even sooner from when it's released. So let's get started.
Absolutely. The one tidbit that is still yet to be tidied up is we don't actually know exactly where the Australian leg of the competition will be played. So I think there was promotional material dating back a fair way now that did say that Melbourne was going to be the host. Obviously, South Melbourne, that would be logical, right? But the problem with Lakeside Stadium is, I believe the issue is that it's part of the exclusion area for when the F1 comes to town. In March, I think,
yes,
of this year. So I believe the Australia stint is scheduled for February, so maybe that slides just inside. So we still actually have to figure out where we're going to play these Australian games.
Yeah, and we've seen with like the grand final of the championship itself, right? They couldn't actually properly organise Lakeside, and it ended up being a bit of an issue. I just think it's to do with the logistics of the venue. You mentioned being surrounded by the F1 Grand Prix, and there are structures and things that have to be put in months in advance. I know there was even some Grand Prix related works that went on in like November, December period. It's just the nature of the venue there as well. But also with things like the fact that it is predominantly, and obviously this, an athletics facility, right? So I imagine that's also going to play a big part of it. But I also would think that even if you can't get Lakeside, not exactly a lack of fitting venues in a place like metropolitan Melbourne for a competition of this stature. And so I don't think it should be too big of a problem. But again, it's more just those logistics, and it is very, very ironic, I must say, for the UFC to be the ones always having the headache. They're now, for the first time ever, relying on Australia and saying, "Hey, Australia, can you do us this thing?" And we're going, "Oh, we might need a minute to think about it." So that's a little funny.
It is. All right. I think there we go. There's your preview for the OFC Pro League. It's a very exciting competition. We have so much football to try and keep track of on the Round Ball Australia podcast. We're going to do our best to keep you in touch with the competition as it progresses as well. Obviously, we have these circuits. The games come thick and fast and then little breaks. So maybe there'll be an opportunity, perhaps, Matt, to wrap up every little circuit as well as they come to town and move on through. But exciting times for Oceanic football. Thanks very much for joining me today. It's always, I can't wait. Whenever we do these episodes, like the idea of the Luxembourg goalkeeper and the Arctic Circle and all that stuff, I know I'm going to get something great. I look forward to it every time.
Yeah, no worries. And this is the part where I would love to do some sort of greeting. I don't know how to say goodbye in any Pacific language, and I do sincerely apologise.
Does Kia ora work the other way? It's kind of like a hello and goodbye as well?
Oh, you might be right, but the fact that I personally can't confidently say yes, I'm not gonna go out and say it because it'd be a little bit awkward.
All right. Well, tentatively, Kia ora. I will confirm the proper use of that phrase before we kick off on Auckland on the weekend, and I'll bring it back and I'll use it properly next time, I swear. But that'll do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thank you very much for listening at home. We appreciate your company. We'll be back on Friday, third podcast of the week, your usual A-League preview. And as we're recording, we've just seen the news that the Central Coast Mariners have been passed back operationally to the APL as well. So we'll talk about that more on Friday's release. But we'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.